So this morning I want to talk to you about a bit of history and background about Buddhism and Zen, how it came to be, where it came from, and where it is in the world today. Today, in the world, there are three main traditions of Buddhism. When we say traditions, we mean in Buddhist speak like three different schools of Buddhism. There's Theravada in Southeast Asia, Tibetan Buddhism, and Zen, Zen being the smaller of the three. Theravada, these are the monks that wear the saffron golden robes, and they are mainly associated in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, in those sort of areas. And of course, today, Theravada has spread right across the Western world. Tibetan, these are the monks and the nuns that wear the dark red burgundy robes. They're in Tibet, northern India, some in China, Nepal being a Hindu country, Bhutan, and two, with a great effort from His Holiness the Dalai Lama over the last 40 odd years, Tibetan Buddhism has also spread rapidly throughout the Western world. And then there's Zen. Zen is primarily, it's big time in China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, and is now spreading right across the Western world. And it is said to be the fastest growing form of Buddhism in the West due to its simplicity of practice. And I'll talk to you about that shortly. So, where did it all begin? Well, 2,600 years ago, Gautama Siddhartha was born. He was born as a prince in a small, very small kingdom in southern Nepal, about 17 kilometres north of the Indian border. When he was born, as was the tradition at the time, people of substance or wealth, they would bring in a shaman or a sage or a wise person to read the underneath of the child's feet to predict the child's future. A hermit from the mountains who hadn't been seen for over 15 years, who heard about the birth of Siddhartha, came down to the kingdom, and he is actually the one who read the child's feet. And he said to Siddhartha's father, the king, he said, "Your son will be a great man of religion or a great king. That is what I predict from under his feet." Initially, the king was quite excited about this because he really wanted his son to take over the running of the kingdom. But after a little bit of time, he thought, well, what's this religion bit? This great man of religion bit? And he became concerned. So for the first 20 or more years of Siddhartha's life, he didn't venture outside the palace. He was supplied with all the luxuries of life, including at the age of 19, he was supplied with a wife. A bit after that time, he actually went outside the palace with his father, and he was quite taken aback by what he saw. He saw old people. He'd never been told there was such a thing as old people. He saw people's sickness. He saw disease. He saw dead bodies in the street. He saw people in a state of suffering. He knew nothing about this. He genuinely believed that how he lived in the palace was how people lived outside the palace. So he was quite concerned. Late one night, just before his son Raoul was born, he left the palace and decided, I've got to go and find out the cause of all this suffering, the cause of all this upset in the world. And then for the next 15 years, he wandered from one great guru to the next, Hindu guru. He was born a Hindu guru to the next, looking for the answers to this discontentment and this suffering that the people were involved in. You'd hear about one great guru and you go and spend 2 or 3 years with him, learn everything he has to tell him, and realise I've gained an awful lot of knowledge, but it still hasn't answered the questions. He'd hear about another great guru on a mountaintop somewhere else, and off he'd go again. He did this 3 or 4 times over that 15 years. And even after that 15 years, he came to the conclusion, well, these guys have got great knowledge and understanding and awareness, but they're not answering the questions that I'm asking about suffering and discontentment. At the time, what was becoming popular was the practice of asceticism. And he decided the idea of asceticism being that the more you deprive the body simply being a vessel, the quicker and the easier it would be to gain enlightenment. So he took up the practice of asceticism, and he joined up with half a dozen like-minded chaps, and they wandered backwards and forwards across northern India, living on pine needles and water and living under the stars in the search for enlightenment and understanding. This went on for 6 years. At the end of the 6 years, he realised, I still haven't got the answers. At this time, they all arrived in a place in northern India called Bulgaria, where Siddhartha said to his friends, look, completely emaciated, skeletal from all the deprivation and starvation. He said to his friends, look, I'm not going any further. So I'm going to sit under this tree over here, and one or two things is going to happen. I'm going to find and work out the answers to the questions that I'm looking for asking, the answers to the questions, or my time is done. That's it. I can't do this stuff anymore. For the next almost 90 days, he sat under the tree. He did some walking meditation, but mostly sitting meditation. And I believe that the first 30 days, he ate 1 caraway seed a day. The next 30 days was 1 peppercorn seed a day. I'm not sure what it was for the last couple of weeks. Completely emaciated, in a state of starvation before we even started. As you can well imagine now, probably getting towards the end, becoming a little bit hallucinogenic, as you can imagine. Things started to pour into his mind all of a sudden. Whilst they almost came into his mind simultaneously, the first thing that came into his mind is a thing called dependent origination. That's what we call it now. And we'll be discussing that over this week. The second thing that came almost instantaneously in his mind is a teaching we now talk about, which is called the Four Noble Truths. And let me just run through those with you very, very briefly. The first noble truth is that in this life, in this world, there is suffering, discontentment, dissatisfaction. For 2,600 years, the word has been suffering. In the last, 15, 18 years or so, there have been some very learned academics who, instead of translating the Sanskrit, have been translating the ancient Pali, Pali being the language the Buddha actually spoke. And they believe when they translate this word from Pali, they think it sounds more like discontentment or dissatisfaction rather than suffering. No matter, so I say all three just to cover my bases. Suffering, discontentment, dissatisfaction. The second noble truth, there is a cause. There is a cause to this suffering and this discontentment. And the cause is our wanting, our lusting, our craving, and our attachments. And we'll talk about those over the weekend as well. The third noble truth is that there is a way out. There can be a cessation to the suffering. And the fourth noble truth is that way out. Today, it's known as the Eightfold Path, or the Middle Path, or the Middle Way. It's about having the right mindedness in life, having the right attitudes in life, having the correct aspirations in life, having the right livelihood in life, using the right speech in life, having the right concentration in life, having the right livelihood in life. Towards the end of this almost 90 days, over the period of time that he'd been sitting there, a milkmaid had been walking past, going to work every now and again, and she saw this guy sitting under the tree, slowly deteriorating, getting worse and worse. It was around this time that she actually decided to help him, and she brought him a bowl of rice milk. To us today, for us, it'd be like a dessert almost, a bowl of ice cream or something. Okay. And she gave it to him. I didn't realise they had Murphy's Law 2,600 years ago, but Murphy's Law was, just as he's eating the rice milk, his 6 friends walked past. See him eating the rice milk instead of pine needles and go, well, that's the end of you, fella. And they scrubbed him and walked away because he let the team down. Over a period of time later, he regained his strength and came to realise that maybe asceticism is not the way. And it's what something probably your mothers have told you in your life. You didn't know she was talking to you about Buddhism. She probably didn't know she was talking to you about Buddhism when she said to you, take the middle way, not too much of this and not too little of that. And the Buddha and Siddhartha came to understanding that this is the way, the middle path. Not just in food, but in emotions, in spirituality, in everything. Once he had regained his strength, he walked from Bodh to Varanasi, to a place called Sanath, which is like a suburb of Varanasi. And at Sanath, there's a big deer park. Even now, 2,600 years later, that deer park is still at Sanath. And Sanath was a place where a lot of people would gather and exchange ideas, get up and talk about what they think, and other people would listen and go, yes, no, maybe, whatever. Now, it's a bit of a good stretch of the legs from Bodh to Varanasi. Rose and I have driven from Bodh to Varanasi, and it's a good 300 kilometres, so it's a good old stretch of the legs. When he arrived there was quite a lot of people there talking. In fact, even his 6 friends are also there, had been there for quite a while. And he listened and he waited, and eventually his turn came to speak. So people gathered around, thought, what's Siddhartha going to talk about? He decided not to talk about dependent origination. He thought it might just go over their heads a little bit. So the first teaching he gave was on the Four Noble Truths. He gave quite a very long and intense dissertation on the concept of the Four Noble Truths. At the end of his talk, people started to call him the Buddha. Now, the word Buddha simply means the awakened one, somebody who is aware and awake to what is around us. Even 4 of his 6 friends became engrossed in what he was saying. And then for the next 49 years, the Buddha, with these friends and usually 1,000 people follow him, he travelled backwards and forwards across northern India, giving teachings. Over this period of time, he was said to have given 82,000 teachings over this 49 years. And they have now become known as the 82,000 doors to enlightenment. Towards the end of his days, at the age of 80, he realised that his time was coming to an end. And he wanted to go back to his father's kingdom for one last visit. So 1,250 people in tow, they set off for Lumbini, up in the area where he was born. He didn't quite get there. He got to a place called Kushangarha. Kushangarha is about 11 kilometres south of Lumbini, where he passed away in 543 BC. When he passed away, they disassembled his body, and different parts of his body were sent to all different temples and monasteries around Asia and India. And today there are still relics of his in these different areas under big stupas, etc. Now, in your time, you may have seen different drawings or paintings or carvings of the Buddha. Here we have a standing Buddha. That's a standing Buddha of Thailand. Okay. You saw the big standing Buddha as you came in through the front gates yesterday. Whilst they may have different hand positions, which mean slightly different things, but basically a standing Buddha is depicting the Buddha preparing to stepping off and go teaching. The sitting Buddha, of course, is the meditating Buddha, like the one over here behind you or you see around the place. Yeah. There are different Buddhas with different hand positions, some very industrious and business-minded person some years ago decided not to make enough money selling one Buddha. So he invented 5. The Buddha in the north, south, east, west, and the central Buddha. The one you see at the bottom of our garden down here is the Buddha in the west. I think he's sitting here like this. We only bought the one in the west because that's the western end of our property down there. Then there's the reclining Buddha. You might have seen it on the walking path. There's a 3/4 life-size carving down there of the reclining Buddha where he's laying back, raised up in his right hand, like that. This is the most auspicious depiction of the Buddha because it depicts the last minutes and the last seconds of the Buddha's life in Kushanggata. When he raised himself up on his elbow, on his right elbow, he spoke his last words to the 1,250 people who were with him. And his last words were, "Everything is impermanent. Look to your salvation with diligence." He put his head down and he was gone. The other one you might see is the big fat laughing Buddha. Okay, there's a couple just over here. There's a big one at the bottom of the garden. People go, well, that must have been the Buddha when he was old and fat, and this was the Buddha when he was young and thin. I think, well, it wouldn't have been the other way around. He was young and fat as a prince, and after walking across India for 49 years, he'd probably be tall and thin. But no, this is not the case at all. Okay. Living in a Western country and growing up under Western Christian ideals, we don't completely understand. As I said to you, the word Buddha simply means the awakened one. Before the time of Siddhartha, there had been people who had attained Buddhahood. Since the time of Siddhartha, since the time of the Buddha, there have also been people who have attained awakening and Buddhahood. When we say Buddha, we just think of Gautama Siddhartha. No, there's more. The big fat laughing Buddha, his name is Ho Tai. He was the 10th century Chan or Zen form of Chinese priest in China. And he is depicted, as you can see over here, he'd have a sack on his back, wandering around, and there's usually coins attached with him as well, when you see statues or carvings of him. He was a wandering medicine. Like the Buddha, he had no home, he wandered. At that time, in the 10th century, there was famine, not only in Japan, but mostly in China. And the numbers of robed teachers had decreased because really the lay people were not in a position to help support them. They have enough difficulty feeding themselves. And he would wander from town to town. And when he would come into a town or a village, people would say to him, "Please look, we've got a lovely temple, we have no teacher. Please come to our temple and give us teachings." And he would say, "Look, I do not give teachings. Give me a penny." They go, no, 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 no. We don't have a teacher. A beautiful temple. Please come. So I do not give teachings. Give me a penny. And eventually people would give him a penny. And then once he had enough pennies, he'd go and buy toys and donuts and lollies and give them to the children of the village. And over time, this became known as the kindergarten of the streets. And today, Ho Tai is highly revered in China, almost like the Santa Claus of China, maybe. If you go into some very big, fancy Chinese restaurants, and I've seen a couple in my time, they have a beautiful big wooden carved statue of Ho Tai, bigger than the one we have down in the garden, and there's little babies crawling all over them. This is Ho Tai. That's how that came to be. So, jumping ahead now to the year 600 AD, late 5th century, early 6th century, there was a monk in India by the name of Bodhidharma. And we don't know a great deal about Bodhidharma prior to his ordination, but it's interesting that we know so little. He was given such an auspicious name of Bodhidharma. Excuse me. The word Bodhi comes from the local name of the tree that the Buddha sat under, the Bodhi tree, the tree of wisdom, the tree of life, the tree of knowledge. And the word Dharma is the word that we use both in Buddhism and in Hinduism to describe the teachings. So Bodhidharma simply translates into English wisdom in the teachings. It's quite an auspicious name. Bodhidharma went from India to China to take a new way of looking at Buddhism. Buddhism was already in China, but it was lingering a bit. And Bodhidharma turned up with a new way and a new approach. Where he started giving his teachings is now a very, very famous temple in China, known as the Shaolin Temple on Mount Sung, where all the Kung Fu stuff originated. And Bodhidharma lived in a cave behind the temple on Mount Sung. And he's said to have lived in that cave for 9 years. He became known as the Mad Monk who lived in this cave. And he's depicted as having dark woolly hair, a hairy body, and blue eyes, which sort of indicates that maybe he was an Indian. There's a bit of controversy over what nationality he actually was. There's been suggestion he might have been Persian or something like that. We don't truly know. So Bodhidharma came with this new way, this new approach. To put in very simplistic terms, up until about that time, the practice of studying the teachings, studying the Buddha's words, was to gain knowledge and understanding, so that you become aware and awake in your own self. Bodhidharma's idea was now to put this knowledge and understanding into the practice of life. Now, at the time in China, there was two main schools of thought. There was Confucianism and Tao, or Taoism as it's called. And Taoism and Buddhism had some similarities, and they tended to just intermingle a little bit. This intermingling became known as Chan, C-H'-A-N. And over the next 100 years, Chan just took over as the main teaching in China. A couple of 100 years later, this knowledge of Chan crossed the South China Sea into Japan, where it became known as Zen. Zen is not like the Japanese translation of Chan. Chan, the Chinese word Chan, is the Chinese translation of the ancient Sanskrit word dhyana. The Japanese word Zen is the Japanese translation of the ancient Sanskrit word dhyana. The English translation of dhyana is very simply contemplation, meditation. So Zen simply means meditation. After the Second World War, with hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers in Japan, mostly American but also Australian, English, Canadian, etc., in Japan helping to rebuild the country after the war. These soldiers came into contact with this concept of Zen they'd never heard of before. And in many cases, not only did they take back this understanding of Zen back to their home countries, in many cases, they also took Japanese wives home as well. And in the late 40s, early 50s, this became the beginning of the movement of Zen into the West. As I said to you earlier, today Zen is considered to be the fastest growing form of Zen in the West due to its simplicity of practice, even though it's still the smallest form of Buddhism in the West. So what do I mean by simplicity of practice? For example, for devoted followers of Theravada, the Southeast Asian tradition of Buddhism, the monks that wear the saffron golden robes, so the monks and the practitioners of that, they will restrict themselves from singing and dancing and music and mobile phones, even though I've seen a lot of Theravada monks with mobile phones. The idea being that they believe these things are a distraction. And the goal of Theravada is the attainment of enlightenment. And these things are a distraction. So they try to not be involved with them. In Tibetan Buddhism, they have wonderful singing and dancing and colour, pageantry. But they also talk about things like ghosts and spirits and black and white devils and oracles. These have nothing to do with Buddhism itself. The same as the restrictiveness of Theravada has nothing to do with Buddhism itself. These are simply geographical anomalies. The Buddha's teachings are the Buddha's teachings. When Buddhism went into Tibet to get a foothold, it integrated with the already ancient traditions and belief systems of Tibet, almost like an earth or pagan style of spirituality. And it's come out looking the amazing colour and traditions that it is today. Also in the Tibetan system, if you are a devotee or a serious practitioner, you're expected by the end of your days, or before the end of your days, to have completed 100,000 prostrations. Do you all know what a prostration is? Anybody not know? Okay, prostration. I can only do one with my knees and then I roll around the floor and it's not a good look. Okay. When Rose and I were in India, in Bodh in the Bodhi tree is in a valley. And today, or in the year 300 BC, King Ashoka built a huge temple up beside the Bodhi tree called the Mahabodhi temple. So the temple and the tree are in the valley. And today it's been cut into the valley and there's about 40 metres by 40 metres all the way around the tree and the Mahabodhi temple, all beautifully tiled. And then it goes up to the next level, which is squared out and tiled, up another level, up to a top level. While we were there, we were visiting the tree for 5 days, there were these 2 young Indian boys. I guess they would have been 13, 14, maybe. And they were obviously Buddhists because they were getting their prostrations in, which is a good idea to do when your knees still work. So that worked very well. So How they were doing it, they were standing up straight, they held a marigold in their hand. Marigold here, here, here. Then they lay down flat on the ground, face on the ground, stretched out. They dropped the marigold. And they stood up. They took one step, they picked up the marigold, and they did that again. And they're doing that for 5 days that we were visiting there. All around us were Tibetan monks as well, doing prostrations. They actually had a bit of a shortcut. Had like what they call a prostration board, like a big piece of timber about the size of a door. And they had hand slides. They up and down and slide, up and down and up. They were really catching up and knocking him out. So that's a prostration. Then there's Zen. In Zen, we don't do all the chanting that they do in Tibetan or in Theravada. We don't do the prostrations. Yes, we still have some of these flowery things around the outside, which are geographical anomalies coming from China and Japan, such as tea ceremonies, calligraphy, art, music, origami, flower arranging, etc. These have nothing to do with Buddhism. The Buddha's teachings are simply the Buddha's teachings. But they're just geographical anomalies. In Zen, the only thing we really do is gasho. This is just a form of respect. And we normally gasho before and after teachings or before and after receiving teachings. So, the only real chanting that we do in Zen is a thing called the Heart Sutra. It's not a very long teaching. It's not a very long sutra at all. It was actually a conversation that was overheard when the Buddha was having a talk to one of his senior disciples by the name of Sariputra. And he was trying to explain to Sariputra the concept of emptiness. Now, emptiness is the pinnacle of understanding in Buddhism. And it's only in Buddhism that there is a teaching on emptiness. And I'll give you a little bit of insight into that later in the week. That's the only chant that we do in Zen. We don't get involved in endless hours of chanting or endless hours of prostrations. It all comes down to the simplicity of the practice of Zen. The knowledge of the Buddha is said to be the gaining of understanding of awareness. Zen is said to be this knowledge and this understanding in practice. We say that Zen is Buddhism in action. There's a small saying in Buddhism called crossing to the other shore. When you come to a river of life and you wish to cross to the other shore of understanding, you need to build yourself a Bodhi raft of knowledge. And they use that raft of knowledge to cross this river of life to the next shore of understanding. This is Buddhism. Once you get to this next shore of understanding, this is where the Zen part comes in. We say, put down this heavy burden. Put down this heavy burden of this knowledge and this understanding, and now simply live what you have learnt. And when you come to the next river of knowledge, next river of life, want to cross the next shore of understanding, build another Bodhi raft, cross again. When you get there, set down that raft of knowledge and live what you have learnt. This is the practice of Zen. So, this is where it came from. This is where it is today. Thank you for listening.